Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out in this terrible weather. I always seem to pick the rainy day when I do one of my presentations, so thank you for coming out. I want to share with you that when it comes to World War II, I started reading about World War II when I was in elementary school. And for me, it was just sort of a coincidence, really, that I was in my seat and I could barely reach the set of encyclopedias on the wall the teacher had placed there, and I could reach the last volume, which was W through Z. And I could slide that off when I finished my work, and I opened it up, and there was World War I and World War II. And boy, the World War II subject really caught my fascination. So I've spent most of my life reading about the war, talking to those involved in the war, collecting artifacts from the war, studying the war. So I want to mention something before I get started. I viewed The Greatest Generation as my own personal heroes. It's just a remarkable story to be told about World War II, and I'm really excited to share Blair County's role in that this evening. But before I get started, I want to mention that we have in our presence tonight a member of The Greatest Generation and a veteran of World War II. Would you give a round of applause to Mr. Don Kreider? Thank you for your service. All right, now to get started, because if I'm talking about World War II, we might have time for breakfast. So I will say that my wife is my taskmaster. So if I look back at her and she's doing this, I know that a couple stories too many. So let me go ahead and get started. And there we go. Turn on my remote. So obviously for the people of Blair County and the rest of the country, the war officially starts with the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. Now, the war was raging for a year and a half before that in Europe, and long before that in Asia and Africa. So it's not until the Pearl Harbor attack. In fact, most Americans were happy that the war was going on the other oceans, not here. So they were surprised on that Sunday afternoon, and they broke into a New York Giants football game. I still remember the story because the guy making the tackle was Bruiser Kennard, which is like the greatest football name ever. And they interrupt the broadcast to announce that the attack is taking place on Pearl Harbor, and Americans are in shock. They're angry. They're sad. They're upset. Some don't even know where Pearl Harbor is. Even when it appears in the paper and it says Pearl Harbor TH, which stands for Territory of Hawaii, they're not quite sure where that is. So this becomes a galvanizing point for the country. For those going to serve, the next day in Altoona, they're lined up down the street at the recruiting office. On the home front, which I'll be telling you about tonight as well, they're motivated to buy war bonds. They're motivated to participate in rationing programs. They're motivated to plant their victory gardens. So you'll see a lot of things tonight that are happening on the home front, but also on the front lines for the military. And I have to tell you, over 10,000 men and women from Blair County served in the war. I don't have the time tonight to tell you the stories of everyone. Everyone deserves to have their story told. I just don't have that time tonight. So I've picked a select few to share with you some amazing stories from the war. Some that came home, and unfortunately some that made the ultimate sacrifice for their country. But the galvanizing point is really with the attack on Pearl Harbor. And even you see the headline there on the Altoona Mirror, we accept the challenge. So there's always that motivating point, despite the fear and concern for, I have family members serving at Pearl Harbor. And that news would become apparent 10 days later when the first names were released on who was killed there. 2,000 were killed in the attack. Half of them were killed on a ship called the USS Arizona. We had there we go. We had 2 men from Altoona that were on board the USS Arizona. To give you a quick recap of what happened to the Arizona, the Japanese airplanes, horizontal bombers, were carrying modified artillery shells, and they dropped one right down through the smokestack of the Arizona. It exploded in the ammunition storage section of the ship. The explosion was so significant, it lifted the ship right out of the water and broke it in half. half the casualties were on the USS Arizona. So 2 of the men you see on the far right is George Wolfe. That is a George Wolfe related to the Wolfe Furniture family. And then you see in the middle there John Lipple. John Lipple's family moved from Altoona to Cambria County when he was just 5 years old, but he was born here. I like to talk about John Pencil as well. You'll notice he's a class valedictorian. You don't usually see valedictorians anymore entering the military, and he's a personal favorite of mine because he also played the trombone in the Altoona High School marching band. He died on the USS Helena, which was struck by a Japanese torpedo. It rolled over, capsized, and he lost his life there. The other on the end is Brooks Brubaker. He was probably the first resident of Blair County to die in the war. He was stationed on Hickam Island, which the Japanese hit first, wanted to take out the runway so they could attack the ships without being bothered by fighter aircraft being launched to intercept them. There's one more that would be up here. They announced a death in Spring Cove. And imagine this, the family 2 weeks later received a telegram, that was in air, your son is alive. So our casualties from Pearl Harbor are 4, not 5. And what a blessing that was for the family. But the sadness for these 4 families, thinking we're at peace right now. And of course, with that, the rallying cry of Remember Pearl Harbor results in a multitude of items being made. And you can see on here there's a lady's brooch on there. There is 2 pinback buttons. There's a punch board where if you win the right prize, you win a war bond. That's the item that's on the left. There's a necktie. There's a little model there made of chalk of the USS Arizona going down. And that propaganda poster that shows the enemy as snakes, which is how we felt after the attack on Pearl Harbor. And my remote doesn't want to turn. There we go. So a lot of changes take place to Altoona. You can see on the list here some of those changes. I always drive by the Altoona shops on my way home, and that's when they were fenced in. Before that, you could just walk right into any of the areas. They weren't fenced in until the attack took place. They cut off access to the Horseshoe Curve, and most people think that's because of the railroad. It's because of the water supply. They were concerned with the water supply more so than the railroad at the time. 2 days later, they ground all planes. Can't fly over this area. Our civilian defense program is organized. I'll talk about that one a little bit later. The first inductees, the first persons that showed up on December 8th, were sent off to training on the 10th. And you see there were 79 of those volunteering from the county. Our first air raid system is installed about 2 weeks after the attack on Pearl Harbor. It'll be coordinated with the steam whistles at the Juniata shops. 4 ration boards are developed. The first thing that's going to be rationed, tires. And I'll tell you some stories about that when I get there. The Victory Book Campaign has started. They ask Altoona residents, but across the country, donate books for the campaign. They'll go to soldiers. Altoona donated so many books, and this is what I want you to be impressed with, is what the people did at home as well as the people on the front lines. They donated so many books, the entire, one of the schools in the Altoona School District was filled with books. Altoona School District had an empty school. They filled the entire building with books to be sent off to soldiers in training camps and on the front lines. Well, my remote doesn't like me. Now, once we enter the war, they're going to get Altoona residents and residents across the county and across the country motivated in winning the war. And you could demonstrate your commitment to winning the war by investing 10% of your income in war bonds, by walking instead of driving. Now, eventually they'll take care of that because they'll outlaw all non-essential driving, even driving to work if public transportation is available. That's considered non-essential driving to work, if you can take public transportation instead. Also, they outlaw going to concerts, sporting events, and anything else that doesn't involve the war effort. People really sacrificed at home as well. So if you could demonstrate you're doing those 5 things listed on the screen there on that poster, someone will come to your door in Blair County, and if you certify, they can't really test those. I mean, you could show your war bonds, but if you proved you could do it, you'd receive this. And this is actually one of the stickers that you would proudly put on the front of your house. Certifying on the back, there's the pledge here you would take that you will continue to do the 5 things to have a victory home. I'm going to go ahead and pass that around. Get a chance to see that firsthand. By the way, the advertisement and all newspaper items I have in my presentation came from the Altoona Mirror, except one, which is from the Mountain Echo. And if you go to, it's from the high school's newspaper. Now, one of the things that surprises people when I talk about the home front is that the Altoona police started confiscating things from those that are not citizens. Binoculars, radios, handguns, rifles, shotguns, anything that could be used for the war, it was confiscated by the Altoona Police Department, stored at the city yard. Now, that's not the one out by the TV station today. That would be the one by where the driver's license center is. They stored them there. And all of those names where they confiscated them from were sent to the FBI. That's going to come up later because the FBI is going to pay them a visit. Now, what I decided to do in my presentation is mix in events of the war with events on the home front. Like I said, I can't do all 10,000 plus veterans. So I picked some select veterans to share their stories with you. And the first I picked is Richard Johnson, which my mom's probably looking at that thinking, well, I know that name. And yes, that's my grandfather's cousin. And he has a long military history just himself. When he was growing up, his father served in the Spanish-American War. He enters the military at age 16. Is involved in the Mexican border crisis. Most people aren't aware of that. The incident between U.S. and Mexico that happened just before World War I started when the Germans were trying to provoke them into starting a fight with us. And then he serves in World War I, and eventually he's assigned to the Philippines, where he goes and he marries a Filipino woman. He moves there. When things are looking, if I can use a modern word, a little sketchy in the Philippines, the U.S. Army calls him back. Hey, we need you, your expertise, come on back. And he comes back, and they assign him to be an advisor. He ends up in a part of the Philippines called Bataan. Now, one of the things I'm going to weave together here in this story is I picked some famous movies that connect the events of the movie, because you may have seen the movie, with reality of the men from Blair County who were serving the military at that time. So this is the movie Bataan. It's about the peninsula where American forces pulled back to as the Japanese advanced in the Philippines. And the movie's a real raw movie. It's 1943. If you watch the movie, you have people in the film talking about, we can beat the Japanese. At the end, the film closes not with us essentially losing the islands, because that's what happened. In fact, the U.S. government abandoned them and said, we can't defend the Philippines and our West Coast. We abandoned more than 10,000 men in the Philippines. It's a very sad chapter of American history, including Richard Johnson. During the fighting there, he was awarded a Silver Star for bravery. He was captured by the Japanese, survived the Bataan Death March, 50,000 American and Filipinos forced to march in 100-degree weather, no water. Sometimes they were beaten if they couldn't keep up, bayoneted if they couldn't keep up. He survived that, made it to the prison camp at Cabanatuan, where he died of illness. Not quite the same story that's portrayed in the film Bataan. All that appeared in the Altoona Mirror at the time was a copy of the telegram that they had received that the Japanese government reported to the Red Cross that Richard Johnson has died in the Philippines. Paying for the war. We don't really have a connection with this today because, recent wars, whether it be, Desert Storm and Desert Shield or the war on terrorism, Nobody comes around door to door asking you to buy a war bond to support that or a government savings bond to support that. But that was common during World War I and World War II and even the Civil War. In fact, 60% of the war will be paid for by people like all of you, by citizens who purchased those bonds. The other 40% is paid for with taxes. And I would show you this, but again, we'll be here until breakfast. Disney made a cartoon about taxes to defeat the Axis. And I can tell you, I've watched it several times. Every time I watch it, it makes me want to pull my wallet out and hand over some money. It's that good. I'm like, yes. And I'm like, wait a minute. not so fast. But it's that good in getting people to want to help with the war effort. Now, how much does this war cost? There's your total price. That is the total amount of money spent by the U.S. government from its creation with the Constitution and the election of George Washington in 1789 until 1940. Take that and double it. That's a lot of money. So where are we going to get it? By asking the citizens to do that. Around Altoona and around the county, you could find posters, buy war bonds, showing a brave soldier on the fight. You could wear pins and buttons. You could go downtown and purchase a bank. In schools, they sang that song, Uncle Sam is my banker. Let me give my money to Uncle Sam to help win this war. By the way, all items pictured are real artifacts from the war. And what's the spirit like in Altoona? The Altoona Railroad shops were the first section of the entire Pennsylvania Railroad to have 100% of their employees sign up to commit money to the war effort. Now, I tried to blow up the article there so you could see it, but the first section, the first shop in the entire Pennsylvania Railroad system to commit to buying 100% of the employees to commit to payroll deduction. They take it out of your check before you even see it, hand you that war bond. The government didn't just get enough from the war bonds, though. They also conducted something called war loans. A war loan was a 5-week period in which the government said from, let's say, today's date until, I don't know, June 28th, we're going to have a war loan and encourage everybody to do even more, buy even more war bonds. And this is just remarkable what they're going to do. And I have to tell you this, the first war loan went only to banks and corporations and high rollers. It didn't get any money. So the government came back and said, let's try the citizens for the second war loan. Much more effort from the citizens. Now, by the third war loan, the government said, this is really going great. We're going to set goals for counties. So think about a county this size. What do you think the government's going to say your goal is, Blair County, for a 1-month period, purchasing bonds? Think about that a second. And here's your goal for the third war loan. $5.8 million for the county. And then the number for Altoona is within that number. So Altoona was responsible for $4 million. The rest of the county had $1.8 million. Did we meet the goal? You bet we surpassed it. I don't know that we could do that today. The fifth war loan. This one takes place about the same time as D-Day. If you look at the headline in the newspaper there, they increased it. That's what happens when you meet your goal. They increase it. $6.5 million, and then $5 million for Altoona. Did we meet it? You bet. Sixth war loan. Another $5.5 million. 4.3 for Altoona. Now, the war's starting to, if you're like, wait a minute, it's going down. War's starting to wrap up now, getting closer to the end of the war. Seventh war loan. You should recognize the image on the front of the paper there. Blair County met every single goal set by the government for purchasing war bonds. Not all counties did that. I don't want you to think that's well, didn't everybody do that? No. In fact, any typical loan, only about 2/3 of the state of Pennsylvania met their goal. And we met it every single time. Patriotism runs very deep here in this county. And it wasn't just the average citizen walking down the street, it was the schools also. School children. Now, we all know that school children don't have jobs, so if they're buying bonds, it's coming from their parents. Here's a newspaper clipping from the war, and you'll recognize the schools there that are contributing, and that's in the summer. I wasn't getting anywhere. I like school, and I wasn't getting anywhere near it in the summer. So these students are coming to school in the summer to purchase war bonds. And I'd like to know the story here of what happened this particular month, because I look at schools on here. In my elementary school I went to, Curtin is on there, and they had $3,000 worth of bond sales in 1 month in the summer. That almost beat the high school. The students of Altoona alone during the war, ready for this one? $1.5 million in bonds. Just Altoona. Remarkable. And by the way, the photograph on the bottom is from Altoona High School. That was one of the displays inside the high school. And the poster on the right is asking for, it's General Eisenhower asking for the purchase of bonds. It wasn't just the schools. Downtown stores, storefronts, instead of decorating with the usual Christmas, it became patriotic Christmas. Red, white, and blue Santa. You could go to a store and purchase something. You would enter into a drawing to win a war bond. Or you could purchase war stamps. What you see pictured there on the screen on the right side are stamps. Get enough stamps and you can buy a war bond. No excuse for anybody. A $25 war bond was $18.25. And then you keep it for 7 years and the government gives you your 25. One of the great stories from the war is a young 5th grader at Wright Elementary School that went home and told her dad, "Dad, I want to buy a real bond." He said, "What do you mean by that?" "I want to buy not the $25 ones and $100 ones that my classmates buy. I want to buy a real bond." Now, her family name is McCartney. She went to school, and I can't even imagine this, having taught for 34 years. She went to school with $3,750 and bought a $5,000 war bond as a 5th grader. I love my high school students, but I'm not sure they're going to make it to school with $3,750. So I think that's a great story about the level of patriotism. Here's the Altoona Chamber of Commerce. They're asking for 50,000 volunteers in the county to step up and agree to be part of this victory campaign, which means you promise to buy war bonds. 50,000. Again, I compare that to today. Does America have that same spirit today where if they ask, in the state of Pennsylvania, 50,000 people to volunteer for something for our country? And I don't know that we get it. I hope so. I just don't know. All through the city of Altoona, you could see war bond posters. Publicly printed, privately printed. They were everywhere. I started collecting them about 35 years ago, and I'm up to 500, and I have nowhere near all of them. They were everywhere. Many of you would probably recognize this one. That's the artistry of Norman Rockwell, exactly. And here's one. This one's from Gables. If you go into Gables and you buy a war bond there, they'll give you a sticker. On the sticker, you purchase a bomb to drop on Hitler. It's great for sales. And the sticker at the bottom, I have one. So I'm going to pass that around for you for all of you to see the sticker. put your name on that. They attach it to the bomb. Now we know Hitler's not really going to get it if it's attached to the bomb. But it's the symbolic gesture of putting that on there and getting that bomb sent to Hitler. And okay, back to the military for a minute. My favorite war movie is the Battle of Midway. I became obsessed with that. I tell you how many times I've seen it, but I'd be embarrassed. So I'll just say I've seen it a lot of times. And this was a turning point battle in the war in the Pacific. In fact, for this battle, we really took a gamble. And again, I'm afraid I'm going to look at my wife here, so I'm moving over here so the post's in the way. So at this battle, we really gambled. 6 months into the war, it's not going well. A lot of people think, they look back at these wars and say, well, we won World War I, we won World War II, and they think it was just a victory from the beginning. It wasn't. 6 months into the war, things were really not looking good. In the Pacific, it wasn't good. We had lost the Philippines. That's the largest surrender of an American army ever. And we had a lucky break. One of our code breakers discovered that the Japanese were going to attack something called AF. How'd they figure that out? Just a hunch. And they sent a message to Midway Island, which is island, guess where it is? Midway, it's in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. They sent a message there and said, broadcast to us on open air that your freshwater condenser, what takes salt water and makes it freshwater, broadcast that it's broken. The radio operator said, what are you talking about? I just had a drink of water. It's fine. No, broadcast it. Japanese intercepted it, sent a message back to their headquarters, AF's water station is out. And that's how we found out they were attacking Midway. So we sent everything we had to Midway. But you got to find the Japanese Navy in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. That's a hard task. It's hard to find something in the middle of the ocean. And we got lucky and found them first. 4 of the 6 Japanese aircraft carriers that attacked Pearl Harbor went to the bottom of the ocean that day. Turned the tide in the Pacific Ocean. Now, if you've watched the movie, anybody seen this movie? Okay, all right. Okay. So then you know the story of the strawberries. The scout planes they send out in a fan. Strawberry 5, exactly. Many planes sighted heading to Midway. Strawberry 5 then discovers 2 of the Japanese carriers because they follow the destroyer in the water it's going breakneck speed for a ship going in the water and discover the Japanese fleet. The pilot of Strawberry 5 is Lieutenant William Chase of Altoona. So, we don't have a crystal ball to turn back the clock and say this battle could have turned out differently. But we know because of him, they found the Japanese ships and sent those 4 aircraft carriers to the bottom of the ocean, turning the tide of the war in the Pacific. And that's a PBY Catalina pictured above Lieutenant Chase, the type of plane he was flying. I think that's a great story. All right, back to the home front. Now, listen, people are patriotic, but not everybody is happy about rationing. This one's a hard sell because they tell Americans basically we don't have enough to supply our troops, the Allies, and you at home. So we're going to have to ration things. We're going to have to equally distribute it between all of you. The items are going to be rationed are pictured there on the right. The fact that a government agency does this doesn't help with the idea. Rubber, sugar, 5 pounds a month. Meat, gasoline, 3 gallons a week. Canned foods, wasn't the food, it was the metal. Yes, it was the metal that had to be preserved. Even lumber. And then, of course, during the war, anything else the government said needs to be rationed. Why don't you look for an antique car from 1943? 44? 45. Don't exist. They weren't making them. They shut down all production of consumer automobiles. You had to get permission from the OPA to buy a used car, though. Demonstrate the need. And I'll talk about tires in a moment. It gets even better. So how does this system work? Everyone's basically issued a ration book. I'll show you what one looks like. Everyone, regardless of age. Baby to someone that's a senior citizen who's turned 100. Everybody gets a ration book. And you have to take that to the store. It has your name on the front of it. No ration book, you don't get to purchase the item. So you need the ration book and the money. This is what the ration books look like. A lot of people save these. Your family might have these just out of fear that what if the government puts this back in place? I may need to hold on to this. So a lot of families have these tucked away in a drawer somewhere. When you went to a grocery store, they would actually post on the wall how many points you would need to purchase an item. You go into a grocery store, you might need 14 points for a pound of hamburger and whatever the price might be. What if you have 13 points? Can you wing it to cashier and they say, we'll take the 13? No, doesn't work that way. And if you don't have a whole lot of points, then maybe you can get something that's lesser value, like the sweetbreads or cow tongue or something like that. They don't want a lot of points for. Gas rationing, you were given based upon need, a sticker to go on your car indicating how many gallons of gas you got a week. Here's one that won't surprise you. There's an X sticker. I've never seen one. X was unlimited. You could buy as much gas as you wanted. They discontinued them because it turned out, who took all the X stickers? Wait for this one. Members of Congress. When they did that, said that's it, no more X stickers. Now, there were people that got special permission to drive more than they were allotted. Physicians, for example, priests, ministers, rabbis had special permission to drive more, but 3 gallons a week. So think about that if you only had 3 gallons this week. Rationing was difficult to keep up with. Every week there was a newspaper article. The one in the middle would tell you, here's important rationing information. Here's what you need for fuel oil. Here's what you need for gasoline. Here's what you need for your sugar. Here's what you need to do if you want to buy shoes. Shoes? 1 pair a year. Use your shoe stamp, you're done. Unless you can demonstrate based upon your employer that I need an extra pair of boots for where I work. And then you got to go and testify to that. And I'll talk about that in a moment in front of your neighbors, which could be embarrassing if you're trying to pull a quick one. There on the right is the gas rationing board locally. They would find out people that were driving too much and take away their gas ration. There's a man there that his odometer showed more miles than gas he was allotted. They asked him, where'd you get the gas? He wouldn't tell them. They cut him off of gas for the rest of the war. Others were cut off for months at a time or a few weeks, depending on how severe the penalty. They took the rationing seriously. By the way, the rationing was done, as I mentioned earlier, in schools. So you went to the school. Altoona High School was one particular rationing spot in Altoona. I should probably just use the space bar. Tire rationing. Now, it was really hard to get tires. That postcard is kind of a demonstration of that. You see that man there sleeping with his tire under his arm, and he's got a shotgun there and his dagger protecting his tire. And listen, if you need new tires and you got to go ask the government, can I have more? They put your name in the paper. If you went and said, listen, my truck needs 2 back tires, you'd have to go before the rationing board. They would post your name. That peer pressure of listen, I'm doing the right thing for the war effort. I'm only asking for these because I really need them. There's, again, another example of various items being rationed and which stamps you need. Now, they were also very much concerned with hoarding, and I can understand that. For example, coffee was rationed. Now, I don't like coffee. I don't drink coffee. My wife loves it. So probably buy all the coffee we can get for her. But people were worried about things like that. So they would buy it even if they didn't need it, if they had the stamp. So they came up with a campaign that said, don't hoard. Now here's something you didn't think about though. Do you have more sugar than you need? Boy, your candy, we'll buy it. And I love this line. No questions asked. So we're not asking you where you got it because, listen, there was a black market. You could go to the black market and purchase some sugar around the back of the building. They're not going to ask, but we'll buy it from you if you have extra sugar. Okay, back to the war for a minute. One of the most dangerous jobs in the war, and they're all dangerous, but one of the most dangerous and deadly were the American pilots of the Army Air Force bombing Germany and Italy. And the British were bombing them at night. We were bombing them at day. So you can just imagine how much easier it is to shoot down a plane during the day than it is at night. So our air crews took a beating. In fact, if you survived 25 missions, you got to go home. The first plane to do that was the Memphis Belle. Now, there's a story behind this. They weren't really first. Another plane was first. They thought they'd be first, and they weren't. But they had hyped up the Memphis Belle so much. Look, this is coming. And they already had film crews there. So they focused on the Memphis Belle. There's a documentary about the Memphis Belle made during the war. There was also a film that came out. I'm guessing this is maybe a 1990s film. In either case, whether they were first or second, or any of those involved, this is a dangerous job and worthy of respect. On the bottom right there, you see the crew of the Memphis Belle. You see the second guy in, he's kind of short. The short job went to the ball turret gunner because you basically had to fit in that ball that's under the plane and operate a machine gun. So they always look for the short guys to do that. In fact, the guy that was in the ball turret, he originally wanted to join the military. They turned him down, told him to gain some weight and get a little taller. He actually hung from a pull-up bar to try and stretch himself to get bigger until they said, oh, wait, we'll take you. We need you for this ball turret job. The ball turret gunner in the B-17 Memphis Belle was Cecil Scott from right here outside of Altoona. So again, another Altoona soldier involved in these major events of the war. Now, good news is he came home, he did war bond tours, went all around the country. That's the good news. Not every man in the Army Air Corps at the time, there's no Air Force yet, the Army Air Corps was that lucky. And this is one of my favorite stories. Captain Stephen Lazinski, pilot of a B-17. Altoona High School graduate on a mission to bomb Germany. His plane gets shot up over the target. He loses 2 engines. On the way back through France, coming back to England, he's jumped by German fighters, loses the 3rd engine. He's got 1 engine working. Hydraulics are now shot out on 1 landing gear. He radios back to his base as he's coming across the English Channel. I've got 1 and 1. I've got 1 engine working. I've got 1 landing gear working. Bail out, they tell him. He's not going to bail out. Why? He has injured crew members on board. He radios back, I'm bringing her in. He safely lands that plane and saves the lives of members of his crew. For that, he is awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, which is right below the Congressional Medal of Honor. On his 40th mission, they increased it from 25 to 40 later in the war. On his 40th mission, he's shot down and killed. That's the courage and bravery of Americans during the war and those from Blair County. Now, speaking of bombing, there was a great concern that Altoona would be bombed. Now, we've got important railroad facilities here, so a civilian defense organization is created. Now, we know civil defense from the Cold War era. This is not the same organization. This is their predecessor. So this is not duck and cover, get under the desk. This is prepare for bombs falling on the cities that aren't going to wipe out the whole city, but we may need to shut off the gas mains, and we may need to get people food and resources. And we may need to black out the whole area so we're not bombed. So in April of 1942, Blair County conducts its first blackout drill. The whole city disappears. If you've ever driven down the highway from Evansburg, you know when you come around that one turn, the whole city just lights up? Well, they made it disappear. Every light was out. Really remarkable what they were able to do. The police only had to cite one person that was intoxicated that didn't get the message, and he didn't turn out his lights, but they got his lights out and were able to successfully do that. Supposedly a plane, it's in the newspaper article, a plane flew over the area and took pictures, but I've never seen them. I've never been able to find them, but that would be interesting to see the comparison of the city lit up versus being blacked out. So civilian defense, and sometimes when I do reenacting, I dress up like a civilian defense air raid warden, which my grandfather did when he came home from the Army in World War II. Please note for a moment the item in the bottom left, the blackout kit. That was glow-in-the-dark material. You would buy a kit and put the stickers on things throughout your house so you could operate them when it gets everything is blacked out. And they made special light bulbs that would only shine the light straight down. They made other items to make blackouts easier. And people took this really seriously. Not in Blair County, but in another city, they had a fire alarm go off during an air raid drill. During the drill, fire department said, "We are sticking to our post for the drill." The house burned to the ground. That's how seriously people took that. In San Francisco, they had a civilian defense roadblock set up. They were worried about the Japanese invading the coastline. A woman got confused and drove through it. They shot her. So it's civilian defense is, people kind of, think that civil defense was sort of a waste of time because it wouldn't have really saved people. But this was a serious effort. And again, take a close look at that item in the bottom left because it's going to come up here in a second. Now, I talked about Altoona's air raid warning system. There's an example of one of the air raid alarms installed in Altoona. And then on the front of the store downtown Beverly's, which I believe, Dr. Farrow, is that the donut shop today?
It's a donut shop, and unfortunately, when they moved the doorway forward, the owner, when that first bought the building, said he was keeping it, but then the donut shop moved in, they moved the door forward and removed it, so it's not there anymore.
Yeah, what he's talking about them removing is they installed switches on the front of every store downtown, so the air raid warden, if we were being attacked, could walk down the street, off, 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 and turn every switch off and take out the entire area. And if you notice on the front, I know it's kind of hard even on a screen that size, there's a 7 on the window. It's 7th War Loan stickers. Photo from Altoona High School where they recruited people to be messengers for the Civilian Defense Network. And there's a blackout kit for sale. It's $2, and it can be purchased at Gables. Gables does a great job of marketing all these items during the war. Now, it turns out that bombing the city was not the problem. The problem comes from saboteurs in what is known as Operation Pastorius. Now, a lot of you probably heard this story. I have a lengthy version of the story for sale at the table out there, and all the proceeds of that go to the Historical Society. But I'm going to give you the short and condensed version here. 8 German saboteurs who could speak English and had spent time in the United States were trained by the Abwehr, that's the secret service in CIA in Germany. They came back in teams of 4. 4 landed in Long Island, 4 landed in Florida. They were to meet up again in Chicago and then spread out and destroy factories, bridges, dams, hydroelectric plants, and Pennsylvania Railroad facilities at the Horseshoe Curve. And what happens? Well, they're carrying $200,000. And their leader, George Dash, that's the one in that picture. He's on the top left of the picture. he didn't like the Nazis in the first place, which is kind of miffed at how he gets into this. And he goes to one of his friends on the mission, Ernst Berger. They're in a hotel room, and Dash tells him, listen, only one of us is going to walk out of this room if you don't agree with me. But I want to end this right now and turn us in. I want to be an American again. If you don't agree, I'm going to throw you out the window. Well, Berger agrees. So no destruction occurs. In fact, Dash calls the FBI. They think it's a prank call. They hang up on him. He gets disgusted, and he goes to Washington, D.C. to turn himself in. They laugh at him also until he shows them the money. Show me the money. When he pulls out the wad of cash he's carrying, then they start to listen to him. Some of the supplies they had were explosives made to look like pieces of coal, perfect for blowing up railroad tracks. Now, eventually, 6 of the 8 will be executed. The 2 that turned themselves in were not executed, and they really have a miserable life because they are sent back to Germany after the war, and the Germans view them as traitors, and we view them as saboteurs. So they weren't really welcome in either country. Now, after this, about a few days later, the FBI shows up in Altoona. Remember those weapons I told you were confiscated? They're back again. They're going to search 225 Altoona homes. They destroy radios. We have one of them at Baker Mansion. If you haven't toured Baker Mansion recently, come out and you'll see one of the radios at the inside was destroyed during the raid. And they confiscated more binoculars and so forth. They actually arrested about 20 people and sent them off to a detention center. We usually associate detention centers during the war with just the Japanese, but we actually locked up Italian and German Americans as well. It's just not as large of numbers as the Japanese that were interned on the West Coast. To this day, we don't know who they are. They're still considered secret information by the FBI. Even after a public information request was made, the FBI will not, you get the records and all their names are darkened out. Now, just because there were saboteurs here, we weren't giving up on the idea of an air raid. So we have in Altoona and in Hollidaysburg. The Hollidaysburg post was in Legion Park, where they built an air observation post. In Altoona, we used WWII and the tower that was in Altoona City Hall for the AWS, that's the aircraft warning system. There's no mass radar back then. It's not like today. You want to spot an airplane, you go out with binoculars and look at it 24 hours a day. We manned those posts for 24 hours a day. About 180 volunteers. No one had to repeat their shift. There were 4-hour shifts. No one had to repeat it for 3 months. That's how willing people were to do this. There you see some of the volunteers in Altoona getting ready to fulfill their obligation of their time in the post. By the way, you'll notice there are women in that picture. They allowed women to also be aircraft observers as well. They just couldn't work the night shift. Only the men were permitted to work at night. The women had to be back home. One of the things you had to do if you're going to work in that observation tower, if you're thinking, well, I can volunteer. I got a few spare hours. You had to learn airplane recognition. You received cards like that one on the top left of the screen. Even Mickey Mouse got in on it. So you could learn if is that a friendly plane or is that an enemy plane? Even if the kids wanted to participate, you could buy civilian defense and air raid spotter toy items, which you see there on the advertisement on the right. And don't fall asleep at your post. And you see that reminder on the bottom left there. Let's go back to the military for a moment. And D-Day is one of those famous events that everybody seems to know something about. June 6, 1944, the Allied invasion of Western Europe to take Western Europe back from the Germans and eventually force the Germans to surrender. Several movies made about that are well known. The Longest Day, Saving Private Ryan. I showed Saving Private Ryan in class, to every class, with permission from Spielberg's entertainment group for, I don't know how long. I have every line memorized, so I know the film very well. But I have something I want to to share with you with that film and The Longest Day. One of the missions on The Longest Day was for the destruction of German heavy artillery that was placed on Pointe du Hoc. That's the picture on the top left, which looked down on both American beaches, Omaha Beach and Utah Beach. It could rain destruction down on the Americans that were landing there. So they assigned to the 2nd Ranger Battalion the task of climbing those cliffs and destroying the weapons that were placed there. 3 of those Rangers were from Blair County. The 3 pictured on the screen there. Jack Kuhn, which, we have a road named for him. He was also the chief of police here. And in his later years, he worked as a van driver for the Altoona School District. Very kind. Sheldon Bear, who's a relative of a friend of mine, who just died within the last few years. I'm thinking it's about 3 years ago now. And Vince Hag, all 3 of them were involved in this operation. There was a 4th Ranger from Blair County also, but he wasn't involved in this, but he did fight his way through Europe. Just a remarkable action by them. And there are several good books on this. I would recommend any of them if you want to learn more about their exploits. It was Jack Kuhn who, along with Sergeant Len Lamel, who actually found the German guns. They had moved them and used thermite grenades to destroy the guns. And Jack Kuhn was so kind. He came into school and spoke to the students several times. And just an amazing story. And all 3 of them made it home. And I think Mr. Hag also just passed away within the last few years. Now, not everyone on D-Day has a happy ending to their story. If you watch Saving Private Ryan, you might remember there's a couple scenes where there's a wounded man lying on the beach and there is a medic standing over him, caring for him as the bullets are going by and mortar shells are exploding and machine guns are being fired at them. 2 of the medics killed on Omaha Beach, which was just a nightmare on June 6th. First wave were both from Blair County. Red Francis, who was the golf pro at Blairmont. He turned pro at age 19. He actually worked at the golf course in Tyrone, and then he worked at Blairmont until he said, I need to help my country. He volunteered and went ashore with the first wave at D-Day and made the ultimate sacrifice. John Steele, which is a name you might recognize if you know anything about D-Day, he shares that name with the man that parachuted into France that got stuck on the church steeple. So if you search John Steele D-Day, it comes up with he parachuted and got stuck on the church steeple in St. Mary Glees. Not the same John Steele. This one went ashore in the first wave on Omaha Beach and was killed that day. Again, part of the amazing stories that came out of Blair County. Now, with all this death and dying that's going on and trying to encourage people to buy war bonds, you wouldn't think you'd have to make fun of the enemy or have a respite and laugh for a moment, but they did. So you see here some things. On the bottom right, that's an ashtray in which you put your cigarette out in Hitler's mouth. The bowling pins. Nothing like taking out your frustrations on the enemy. There's a toy guillotine there that you can drop the bar and it cuts off the heads of the enemy. And then you can tie it in with, buying war bonds. Bye-bye Axis if you buy bonds. That's a license plate attachment for the front of your car. The poster that's in the middle. The bottom left is a magic trick. Each one of those figures has a weight in it in a different part. So you put it in the coffin, you hold it up, and then you can impress your friends by saying, okay, this is Hitler inside the coffin. And it's because the weight's in his head and the coffin tilts one way or the other. The creativity was really limitless, and I'm going to do like a little plug at this point. I published a book last year on all of the anti-Axis propaganda. So if you're a World War II amateur historian, professional historian, whatever it might be, it's just an amazing look back in time. And if you are interested, you can see the better looking version of this duo of my wife and I. She has copies of the book that will be for sale at the end. Just wanted to mention those. I can autograph them, but that's not going to change the value. Okay, one thing that you could do in the war that really didn't take a whole lot of money. It didn't take shelling out money for bonds or sacrificing like the rationing did, was planting a victory garden. And look, how can you go wrong if you're doing something that's already being done by Superman, Batman, and Robin? So get in on this, and the more food you produce at home, the less you have to worry about buying in the store, whether it's canned goods or other items. So everybody can plant a victory garden, and they started to appear everywhere. It can be done by the youngest students, like that drawing on the left, and by the senior gentleman on the right that's living in that small little, I guess, camper. But he's got his victory garden. Even the Boy Scouts created a special award for those that planted a victory garden. And again, there's all kinds of items available. Buy victory seeds. Now, a victory seed isn't any different than a regular seed, but it makes you feel patriotic in buying it. There was all kinds of things. There was victory kitchen wrap that you'd buy to save your leftovers in. They really did a good job of marketing the war, getting people's patriotism involved. But there's a variety of items here. In the middle is one for school children to participate in selling those victory seeds. And notice the item in the bottom left corner. Let me make it a little bit bigger for you. That's a victory garden sign from Altoona. You might recognize some of the names on that. We have a former mayor as the chairman. I'm sure you'll recognize the name at the bottom. We have the name McCartney also. And this one came out of a garden that was built during the war. This one always surprised me. If you had a victory garden, but you didn't have the physical strength to get out and plow it, the city highway department would come and plow your victory garden for you. There would probably be a little uproar about that today if the government expenses were being given to people that just wanted a garden plowed, but that's what the article on the left is. And then Gable's department store had an entire section for victory gardens, which makes sense if George Gable was one of the persons involved in the effort. Another thing done at the home front are scrap drives. It's the first major recycling ever done in the United States. They recycled, you name it, paper, rags, glass, metal, rubber, kitchen fat, and milkweed. Anyone know what they use milkweed for? Life jackets, very good. Life jackets. Yeah, now I heard parachutes. They did ask ladies to give up their silk stockings for the parachutes. In fact, they started selling something called a victory pencil so the ladies could draw the seam down the side of their leg. So it looked like they're, because don't dare go outside without your stockings. So you draw the seam down the side of your leg and you're good to go. I have one. I should have brought that along tonight, but the rain interferes with carrying some artifacts in. And again, I have to tell you, Blair County was amazing. And I'm not going to read all of these, but every single scrap drive we had, you see the silk nylon drive there, the second one in, a paper drive, glass drive, 13 railroad cars filled with paper. Every time there was a drive conducted in Altoona, people fell in line. My favorite one was the drive for metal. Altoona High School played a major role in this. And students, in a moment of a good sense of humor during the war, Principal Maddox, who was the principal then, went off to a conference on how can you get your students to support the war. So what did they do when he was away? They stacked all the scrap in his office. So you see the picture there on the right. That's all the scrap stacked in his office. No word in the newspaper there about his reaction to that. I will tell you that one of the items brought in for the scrap drive was a World War I German machine gun. Could you imagine a student for a scrap drive today coming into school with a machine gun? That would certainly cause a lot of panic. Now, here's another trivia question for you. Who's that fella on the right? Very good. That's Walt Disney. Even Walt Disney, now, he didn't live in Blair County, obviously, but I think this is such a great story of the commitment to the war. Those are cast iron statues of Bambi, which he's about to take a sledgehammer to, and he's donating them to a scrap drive. So everyone's getting in on this scrap drive action. In fact, Blair County did so well, you ready for this? We ranked 3rd in the state. The only 2 counties that beat us, I'm sure you can figure them out, Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, which are not the counties, but they beat us in terms of numbers. 3rd in the state. And you got to, and we were given that large pennant from the state of Pennsylvania to display our success. It's about 5 feet long. It doesn't look good in that big in the picture, but that was given to us by the War Production Board, which was in charge of the salvage scrap program. And I love Tasty Cakes. I maybe love them too much, but there's an ad there from Tasty Cake where you can be a home front hero if you turn in your oven. Hey, if you need it, well, you know, it's for the war effort. Kitchen fat, which I think this one's a classic on the home front. Kitchen fat was recycled for making glycerin, which you can make explosives. So they asked the ladies at home when you're in the kitchen, and I don't want to offend anyone, but that's who these advertisements were marketed to women. I'm going to show that on the next page. Save your kitchen fat. In fact, the government would give you 2 extra meat ration stamps if you turned in a pound of kitchen fat, of grease. Notice on the bottom of the article on the left, Pennsylvania's quota per month was 1.5 million tons of kitchen fat. And you see on the right, again, these all come from the outside mirror. There's a woman about ready to pour her grease down the sink, which is not a good idea, but that's what she's about ready to do, with Hitler encouraging her, go ahead and do that. And then she says, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to turn this in to be used for explosives. And I think that's a great example of a wartime message. And listen, the Altoona and Blair County folks were remarkable. These are all charities that were drives held for them during the war. The USO, Naval Relief, the Red Cross. Red Cross had a campaign here, give an entire day of pay. Could you imagine someone giving an entire day of their pay today? That's quite a bit of money. The YMCA, Russian War Relief, Dutch War Relief, Chinese War Relief, Belgian War Relief, Greek War Relief, any country that was subjugated by the Axis powers, we tried to help them. Just an amazing amount of money. That's in addition to war bonds, and that you don't get anything back for. This month's campaign was $150,000. There were clothing drives, turning your extra clothing to be sent to countries that were devastated by the war. One poor fella, here's one of those stories I have to tell. One poor fella had laundry service. Every night he would put his laundry out on the bag on the porch. You see what's coming, don't you? He put his laundry out the night of the clothing drive the next day, and they came and took all of his new clothes. So whoever received those, thought that these are really caring Americans. This is a brand new suit jacket, and thank you. Now, back to the war. Battle of the Bulge. I hesitate to put this on because if you know anything about this movie, it's got some big inaccuracies. So I don't want to get into those, but Battle of the Bulge is like during a winter storm. That was the point of it. The movie was filmed with like an inch of snow on the ground. So it doesn't really, and they use modern tanks. And I said I wouldn't get into it. So it's not really that, accurate, but they do get the gist that this is the largest battle the U.S. Army ever took part in. And it was a last-ditch effort of the Germans to push the Allies back to the port of Antwerp into the ocean, and then they could turn around and sue for peace with us and then fight the Russians. Had it worked, who knows what would have happened. The one thing that stopped it is the bravery of the American soldier and the British soldiers and our other allies that fought the German advance. In a winter storm that the rest of us would just hide inside for. Remarkable. And you would think a lot of the casualties from the war were at the beginning of the war, and we'll get to the end of the war, it's kind of slowing down. Not so fast. I want to show you these 5 Altoona mirrors, and these are really symbolic of any Altoona mirror. In that period, this is December of 1944, January of 1945. February of 1945 is the invasion of Iwo Jima in the Pacific. Every single day in the Altoona mirror, it looked like this. 4 Blair County residents casualties. 2 Altoona men killed, 1 missing. 6 Blair County residents casualties. 1 man reported missing, 3 dead. Every single day. It's remarkable. In a sad way, but in a testament to the bravery of the American fighting man. Just a remarkable accomplishment to win this war. And credit to all of them, whether they came home or whether they made the ultimate sacrifice. Altoona had a lot of trains that came through loaded with soldiers heading off to war. So a canteen was established here, operated for 3 years. It never closed for 1 minute. In fact, when it did close, nobody knew where the key was to lock it. They couldn't find the key to lock the building. They had about 1,000 book library there. They had showers. They had a place for about 100 men. And there were some rooms for women that were separate from the men's rooms for wax and waves and spars and Marine Reserve. There's a photo from the dedication of the building. There were about 500 volunteers that manned those facilities, 200 seniors. Now, a senior woman is age 21 and older. A junior hostess is 21 and younger. But there are some photographs of the local women that manned those, the piano, or offered to dance with one of the soldiers, or provided a donut and a cup of coffee. So they got a nice break in their rest here in Altoona. It closed in 1946. It reopened as a teen club. And those of you that know your local history, it was also used as the morgue for the Red Arrow accident. One of the forgotten groups of soldiers from Blair County, and I just wrote a story about this, were the war dogs. 20,000 dogs in the United States went to serve in the war. Some on patrol duty, some on guard duty, some as messengers, and some in combat. There's a picture on the right of the first war dog from Blair County that went to serve in the war. The dog had to be 18 inches tall and 50 pounds. And at first they let in any breed. But then after a while, there were some breeds that were just not cooperative, like Chow Chows. They said, no more Chow Chows. We don't want those. They don't work. In my research, one dog from Blair County, Toby, died in action in the Pacific. But this is a forgotten group from the war. I know it takes a lot to watch your relative go away, but think about how you love your pets. That had to be a challenge too for some folks to say, I'm going to send my dog off and they may not come back. Had to go through training, may not come back. There were actually about 20 dogs they couldn't return to their owners. They did promise to return them, about 20, because they became so mean and aggressive they couldn't let them come back home. And every dog that did come home came with a warning: the dog may still bite. But people welcomed them home. I can't do this without mentioning the Pennsylvania Railroad. Obviously, the Pennsylvania Railroad played a significant role in the war effort. They about doubled their freight traffic and quadrupled their passenger traffic during the war. It's really the high point. After that, the Pennsylvania Railroad begins their decline that eventually leads to the Penn Central, and we won't get into that. Those that worked for the Pennsylvania Railroad in key roles received exemptions from the draft. One of the keys that the government said that Pennsylvania Railroad played such an important role. 90% of freight coming from the middle of the country made in factories going to the East Coast came through Altoona around the Horseshoe Curve and on its way to the coastline to be on transport ships to go to the Pacific Ocean. And credit to the men of Altoona specifically for keeping those cars and engines in working order, specifically stated by the U.S. government. In Altoona, they built special cars for the war. The one on the left is a converted boxcar into a sleeper unit for soldiers. And they use the porthole windows from ships to put windows in the boxcar, right here in the car shops in Altoona. I can't pass on the Pennsylvania Railroad without also mentioning that women played a great role in working for the railroad. Pennsylvania Railroad starts to hire women. You'll notice on the advertisement on the right that they're looking for workers, for laborers and helpers, freight handlers, brakemen, ages 18 to 45 for women. In fact, the railroad, I'm going to ask my lovely wife to come up here for a moment. Last time she helped me in a presentation, someone said to me, you should have had her do the whole presentation. This is one of my favorite finds ever. This is a poster, and she's going to walk it around so everybody gets a chance to see it. A poster to recruit women for the Pennsylvania Railroad. Notice at the bottom, they've got that little add-on about, hey, buy war bonds. They don't want to miss that. But it shows a woman doing, because yeah, you mentioned they got hired by the Pennsylvania Railroad. You're thinking, well, office jobs. No. Same jobs that men do, except less pay, exactly. And at the end of the war, they fired them all. In fact, there's a Pennsylvania Railroad memo that says get rid of the women, essentially. Now, a lot of women worked in the factories, not just there, places like Warnaco and places like that. But there were women that served in the Nurses Corps. Thank you. Yeah. Nurses, I haven't found any women from the area that served as auxiliary pilots. That's the one area I haven't found someone yet. But I want to talk for a moment about Martha Black. There were over 600 veterans from Altoona that were killed in the war. She is the only woman. Martha Black was in the Nurses Corps, and she was in the 820th Air Evacuation Squadron. Think MASH, except no helicopters. They're on airplanes. And flying into the Philippines in, that should say, oh, it does say C-46 down there. I thought I put C-47. And a C-46, which is like the, imagine early transport plane, early like plane used to move people. The plane crashes and she dies, along with all of those on board. She's the only woman to die from Blair County in World War II. We also had one in World War I serving as a nurse as well. Here's a great story of politics. Altoona was supposed to have a cruiser. Now, to explain what a cruiser is, think the game Battleship. And you know, there's an aircraft carrier with 5 holes in it and a battleship with 4. And the next smaller ship's a cruiser, it has 3. Then there's like a destroyer and a submarine that have 2. So think about, in this case, think about the cruiser, which has 3 holes in it. The city of Altoona was supposed to get a cruiser with 3 holes in it. No, we hope it doesn't have really holes in it, but I'm just doing it comparative for size. But politics played a role, and it went to another city. So we ended up getting named for the city of Altoona a Victory Ship. The Victory Ship were quickly built cargo ships. So there was an SS Altoona built during the war. There was an Hollidaysburg built after the war, but the Altoona was built during the war, and there's a image of the SS Altoona. I think we have that on a postcard out at the table as well. So the reason why I picked today's date is for the 80th anniversary of VE Day, which was earlier this month on the 8th, and then the anniversary for VJ Day will come later this summer in August. And if you look at the title of the VJ Day newspaper, new bomb to destroy Japan. I think we all know that the end of the war comes from the use of the atomic bomb on Japan. 5 men from Altoona worked on the Manhattan Project to build the bomb. There are the 5 names listed there. We have a couple of chemists, a couple of engineers, and Paul Hayward was the assistant superintendent of the Washington plant. You know, there were a lot of people working in this project, but to have that many from our community involved in the construction of the atomic bomb, I think, is pretty remarkable. And with that, I'm going to do my last movie. And if you're trying to guess, I'll bet you don't. Now, if you're looking at that, you're like, wait a minute. That's not a war movie. Anybody know where I'm going? Thank you. Exactly. You know, there's a scene where the 3 main characters are drinking. And Quint and Hooper, Quint played by Robert Shaw, start to compare wounds. Like, and I hear like an eel got me here, and Quint had a tattoo removed. And somebody asked him, you know, I can't remember if it was Hooper or the sheriff, asked him, you know, what was it? And he said, was it your girlfriend? She break your heart? And he says, it was a USS Indianapolis. And he says, we just got back from, in Shaw's accent, from delivering the bomb. And he explains the story of the USS Indianapolis, which carried the bomb from the West Coast to the island of Tinian on a secret mission. Nobody knew what its job was. Its radio position was never given for the fear of a Japanese submarine might find them. Well, that's exactly what happens. A Japanese submarine does find the Indianapolis, and it sinks rapidly. They get off a distress call. It's read by a radio operator who thinks it's a Japanese submarine playing a joke, because he says, there's no ships, American ships in this area. He's just trying to draw us out. Rescue forces never show up for 3 days. Those men float in the water for 3 days. Some die of dehydration, some lose their minds, and a fair number are eaten by sharks. And that's why it's in the movie Jaws. So you probably know where this is going. 2 of the crew members were from Altoona. John Marshall, Altoona High School graduate, and James Conrad, who moved to Altoona when he married his wife. We don't know what happened to these men, but over 800 men lost their lives on that ship when it was sunk. The last thing I'd like to share, because I taught at Altoona High School, is the 1943 yearbook. And I don't know that you can read what's on the screen, but what I'm holding here is a calendar of a year in the school at war. Every month, book collection, victory garden planning, training for leaving early from school, night classes so men could go to the army, nursing training for women, knitting blankets for the soldiers, and socks. Every month there were 2 or 3 items going on for the war effort. That, I think, epitomizes the sacrifices on the home front to win this war. And when you put that together with those more than 10,000 who were in uniform, it's an amazing story. And with that, I thank the greatest generation, and I thank all of you for coming this evening. Thank you.